So congratulations, you made it past introduction classes. Now this is our actual first, class about things that we've done so far.
Oh, sorry.
Can you just, figure things out?
Sorry. She's like, Mary. Hey!
Hey, oh.
That's a compliment. No, it's not.
Wow.
Okay, in some things, yes.
All right, so like I mentioned, we're going to be covering a lot of years pretty quickly at the very beginning. This first class is basically covering that whole first poster. We're talking about roughly 40,000 years worth of material. Actually, more than that. A lot of the stuff that we're going to be looking at is not really art. Some of it is. Because the peoples at this time were not necessarily using these objects that we're going to be looking at as art, or at least we don't know. But these were things that were created by people that aren't tools, that aren't buildings, and so we kind of just classify them as art because we don't know how else to classify them. So we talked last period on Tuesday about why do people create art? And the first reason we talked about was there's this innate sense, there's this innate desire to create something. And so we're going to see that at the very beginning. There's a lot of debate over what is the oldest work of art. Before we get there, we need to do a couple definitions. Prehistory. Basically, prehistory refers to all human history that precedes the invention of writing systems. This is around 3100 BC, roughly. Okay, so basically any history that predates writing systems. What's the first writing system that we know about? Nope. Nope.
It was like that thing with the animals that represented letters.
Nope, writing.
Oh, right. Oh.
Cuneiform. Cuneiform.
Actually.
Yep. So that's around 3100 BC. Hieroglyphics are really close to it, though, so you get bonus points for that. And the keeping of written records. So this is a really long period of time. When did peoples first come about? Like Adam and Eve? We don't know. No idea. We'll talk more about this when we talk about moral theology next year. It's dicey. We don't know. But people were around for a long period of time before writing. We at least know that. So we don't really know. For the purposes of Art History Survey, there's different areas that we can split these camps into as well. Basically, we take all of prehistory and we divide it into two main sections. There's what's called Paleolithic. So there's some blanks in there. Paleolithic. Lithic comes from the Greek word lithos, meaning stone. There's another term in art history that we got from lithography. Good job using stone, right? So has the same root word, lithos, meaning stone. Paleo, what's paleo? Anyone know? Also Greek?
Oh, it's like...
Well, let's start with Neolithic. That might be easier. Neolithic? New stone, old stone. Very imaginative. So Paleolithic means old stone. And this is basically from whenever to about 10,000 BC. And then we have Neolithic, which is called new stone, 10,000 to 4,500 BC, or 3,100 BC. Again, there's a lot of debate over exact dates. We're not going to be able to be very specific in this section. Okay, so Paleolithic and Neolithic. What is the oldest work of art? There's a couple candidates. This is what's called the Makapansgat pebble. Disputed age, some people say it's 3 million years, or 3 million BC. Some people say 300,000 BC. Other scholars have said around 100,000 BC. We don't know. We don't know. Yes, that's because it is. This was not made by man.
That's disgusting.
This was not made, no, it's not poop.
No, I know that.
Oh, okay, I thought that's what you were saying.
Just looks really bad.
This is just a river rock, and the erosion has just made it sort of kind of look like a person, a face.
But it wasn't created then.
It wasn't created, so we can't call this art. But this is the earliest object that we know of that was transported by people. It's small. It's smaller than it easily fits in your hand. This was transported by people. How do we know that? Well, because it's not found near a river. It was found deep inside of a cave where there were other settlements, and it was placed there. There's no other reason for someone to carry it around other than they liked it, and it made them feel like it was them. So before people were able to create things, they saw this and they went, "Oh, that looks like a face." We've done that. You look at faces in clouds. You look at faces, in whatever. This is what these very, very early people were doing. They were carrying this pebble around. And so it's not really a work of art. We can't really call it that because it wasn't created by one. But this is one of the earliest objects that was cared for or carried. It's just a piece of stone. And it just sort of looks like a face. This is definitely the oldest work of art that we know of. This is called the Sulawesi Cave. And it was recently-ish discovered in Indonesia. This dates from about 42,000 BC, so this actually predates prehistory. These are drawings that were done on the interior of a cave. Yeah.
So the caves were for sure the oldest work of art?
That we know of as of now. This was just discovered about 10 years ago.
Really? What did they use to make? Did they carve it into the rock? Or did they use
They use other. No, this isn't actually a carving. This is pigment. So they would use pigment. So they would use their fingers, or they would use some sort of a twig or something, some way to.
I'll take it like the paint color or something like that. Then how would?
So they would crush up rocks or stones or plants and mix it with oil or animal fat, or sometimes water or sometimes spit, and you make like a little paste, and that's your paint.
How would pigments not like fade away after that?
Because it's inside of a dark cave, and it's undisturbed for 44,000 years.
What was the name of the cave again?
The Sulawesi Cave. Sulawesi Cave in Indonesia.
So this is like, that's like not daylight, that's nighttime.
Yeah, that's like flash photography.
We had been exploring the cave art of this part of Sulawesi with
This is
our
the reason why it was
scientific
just discovered.
counterparts in Indonesia, the National Research Centre for Archaeology and the local Cultural Heritage Preservation Branch based in Makassar, as well as our colleagues from various other local counterpart organisations. It's an amazingly rich rock art province there in Sulawesi. This cave is in a really well explored area. Our teams have been through there a million times, and then one day, one of the guys just looked up and noticed what seemed to be an entrance to a high-level cave, climbed up a fig tree route to investigate it, and then bang, there's this incredible new rock art site in there that's essentially like nothing we've ever seen before in this entire region. It's this beautiful painting of some sort of hunting scene involving what seem to be these wild animals, a type of wild pig, as well as a type of miniature buffalo known as an anoa, only found on this island. Very small but dangerous animals. Amongst this group of animals running across the cave wall, essentially, you can see a whole group of these tiny little hunters, which at first we thought, wow, these look like little people hunting these animals, but when you look closely at them, you can see that the figures themselves have been portrayed as part human, part animal creatures. They're what we call therianthropes. Like, for example, one of them seems to have the head of a bird and another one seems to have a tail. They're armed with what seem to be spears or ropes that they're using to hunt these wild animals. It's suggested to us this extraordinary scene shows some sort of story or myth.
From what we know here, it's complex, it's fully complex, and it could be linked to like spirituality.
Exactly. We had never seen anything like that at all, anywhere in Sulawesi.
All right, so we're going to get into why they created this here in a second. But first, let's talk about how do we know that it's 42,000 years old? This picture gives you a clue.
The rock.
The rock. What part of the rock? What?
The-
That.
Sorry, the outline.
These. So they painted these onto the cave wall, and we can't tell when they did it. Obviously, we have no written records. It was before there were written records. It's prehistory. But caves over time grow limestone, basically. There's calcium, there's mineral deposits, humidity, dryness, etc. I'm not a geologist. But caves grow kind of outward a little bit. We've all seen stalactites and stalagmites and those types of things. We know kind of how that works. Well, in these types of limestone caves, the caves kind of grow out from the walls very, very slowly over hundreds of thousands of years. And so these little bits here, these are actually, this isn't chipped away. This is stone that has been built on top of it. And so we can tell by dating this little fragment of stone, using carbon dating, we can tell that this is at least 42,000 years old. Because it has to be, because this is covering the painting, right? The material. So that's how we know how old it is. We're going to get into why people are creating these works of art. Here's another cave in Indonesia, other works from the same cave dating from about 1,500 years later. So people had been settled in this area for quite a long time. You heard at the very beginning of the video, the guy was saying this is a very rich area of cave paintings. There's a lot of these caves. Some of them had not been seen before. So we knew about some of them before, but this newer cave, or older cave, depending on how you want to look at it, was more recently discovered. Handprints are a very common early form of art or of decoration. Again, these are dating from about 1,500 years later. So we know that these people were around for a very long time. In Libya and Egypt, we have this very similar Cave of the Beasts. And these works of art always have the same sort of same sort of something going on. There's usually animals, there's usually some sort of a hunting scene, there's usually some figures. They're usually engaged with the animals in some sort. In some cases, they're hunting them. In some cases, it's almost like a ceremonial thing. We don't exactly know what's going on. So the most common subjects in cave paintings: large wild animals, bison, horses, aurochs, which is an old type of an ox, deer, and tracings of human hands. Humans appear, but not in as much detail. The animals are usually done in a lot more detail than the humans are. Why? Don't know. We don't know. They just didn't try to do human faces, portraits, things like that. Again, we don't know why. How are they made? Sometimes by carving, sometimes by drawing, like I explained before, or sometimes by blowing pigment. Here's another one in Borneo. So these are all over the place. You don't see as many of these in North America simply because there are just not as many of these complex cave systems. And the cave systems we do have are usually very wet. There's a lot more water in them. Well, if they're in caves, how do they see? Well, right around the same time, we have the development of this little object, which is an animal fat lamp. So it's kind of hard to see in this top-down thing. This is just a crack. This is not part of the actual lamp itself. So they made a divot basically to hold the fat as like a reservoir. And then they would tip it down, and in this little area, they would just light it. And so you have a little candle with the fat. When you're running low, you just tip it and put some more fat down in that little area. You just tip the whole thing, pour some of the animal fat from this reservoir, from this little divot, down into here, into this second little divot, and there's your lamp. So they would make these little lamps out of stone, and that's how they would get inside the caves. Or sometimes torches, but torches aren't as well preserved. They probably use those too. Yeah. Oh, good. This is one of the more famous ones. This is in Australia. This is a cave that has many, many handprints.
That's so cool.
Again, we don't know exactly what the significance is. We don't know what the story is. We can sort of date them using the same method we did at the Sulawesi cave. And we know these are about 10,000 years old or so, but we don't really know much beyond that. Mm-hmm.
Would they put their hands on it and then put the paint over it?
Just like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm. Oh, they blow it?
Mm-hmm. So they'd mix the pigment in their mouth. Sometimes they would just use the spit. Sometimes they would use the animal fat along with the spit or the oil or whatever and blow it out like a trumpet.
Oh my gosh.
Sometimes they'd use a rod because we would see some rods in some of these caves with the pigment all on the inside. So sometimes they would use it like a tube, or sometimes they would just blow it out with their hand or just with their mouth. Mm-hmm. It's spray paint. They're the very early Banksies. Okay. What can we tell? So this first semester, we're going to be talking a lot about what can we tell about a civilization, about a people, based on their art. Well, we don't know very much, sadly, about these people. We don't know, like I said, the reason behind why they chose these animals versus other animals, why they chose, what the significance is. Is it a story? Is it like a history painting? Is it a ritualistic thing? Is it a religious thing? We don't know.
I don't know if we can really know this, but was this a period of time when they put animals in the same level as humans?
Possibly. Yep. Absolutely could be. So we do know that there was a great reverence for animals in a lot of these cultures. We see that still with indigenous peoples here in North America and South America, right? Seeing animals as life-giving, which they are, right? Treating them with a lot of respect, almost seeing them as deities in and of themselves. So what do you do when you have to kill a deity for food? Well, you want to respect it, right? Otherwise, you're going to suffer the wrath of the deity. So maybe that's what this is. We just don't know. Maybe it's a good luck charm, trying to have a good hunt. Other theories, especially for these handprint drawings, maybe this was some sort of a kind of a growing up ritual, where once you reach a certain age, you get to go in the cave and you can make your mark on the cave as, hey, I've been here. Maybe, we don't know. Maybe it was after your first kill. Again, these are all just theories because there's really no way of knowing for sure. But what can we tell? Well, we can tell that these caves were settlement periods for a very long period of time. The Sulawesi cave, for instance, that was around for 1,500 years. So people were there for a very long time, right? Doesn't seem like a long period of time when we're talking about 42,000 BC to 40,500 BC. But if you put it in context of, well, we're in 2022, think back to the year 500. Okay, that's a long period of time for people to be in one settlement area, right? Other caves were very, very similar. Not quite as long as Sulawesi, but hundreds of years. They were around for a long, long period of time. These are animal drawings. France and Britain have had a great deal of these caves that have been discovered in the last 50 to 70 years. And these are much more complex drawings, much more complex figures than we've seen in other caves that are older. We think that, that these caves are, this is from the Chauvet cave, so towards the bottom there, Chauvet cave, 32,000 to 30,000 BC. So this is dating about 10,000 years after the Sulawesi cave. I'm really kind of in love with this cave painting, not because it's old, not because it's cool, but the artistic depictions are so good. This lion head in profile, it's about as good as any drawing that you would see today. They were very talented. They're very good at what they're doing. And there's a lot of overlapping, right? Just right here in this area, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's a lot of overlapping. Why would they overlap it instead of putting it in a new section? Again, we don't know, right? They're not depicting things in the same way that we would, but
I think maybe it's like they hunt in a pack or something.
maybe, or maybe this is one person's kills, and
They're
so
all
he,
lined up or something.
yeah, I don't know. These are some of the best preserved figurative cave paintings in the world.
Oh my gosh.
There were hundreds of different animals depicted in the Chauvet cave, depicting how many different species? 13 different species of animals.
Is it just a light shining on it? A orange one?
Yeah,
It's probably that one.
yeah. So again, most of these animals are depicted in profile, but we see wild horses, we see rhinos, we see these older bulls. And actually, zoologists have been able to come back, look at these because they're done so well, and they can go, oh, that's a totally different species we didn't know even existed before. We don't even have any fossils or bones about it, but that's a new species. And so they're able to classify new species because of these cave paintings. So we can learn a lot from them. The other famous cave in France is called the Lascaux cave. That's how you pronounce it, Lascaux. I was saying Lascaux for a long time. It's Lascaux. I never know which letters to pronounce and not to pronounce in French. It's kind of a crapshoot. These date from 15,000 BC, so more recent than the Chauvet cave, and a little bit more rudimentary, actually. But again, these people had been around for a very long time. And it's not just these figures, but there's all these figures back here. There's this elk with these massive antlers,
30 million.
and this one too. These can't be super realistic, right? Again, zoologists have come back and looked at these and said, those aren't real. So now they're starting to make some kind of interesting decisions about how to depict these animals. They're kind of using their imagination. They're taking what they've seen and they're using their imagination and expanding on it. This is probably one of the most famous ones. Again, shows an old looking horse, very fat horse.
It's pregnant. Why does it have horns on it?
It's a unicorn. No, I don't know. I think that's just something from behind.
It's actually different. You see that?
All right, so this section, sorry, I couldn't find a good high resolution image of it. This image is actually the one that has taught archaeologists and art historians the most about this this cave painting, and it's brought up a lot of theories. So we have this animal here, totally out of proportion. We have the head and the horns, very big body, very small legs.
Look at his face, Mr.
But this is a man laying down,
It's a bird. The bird.
but he looks like a bird. So archaeologists think that he's actually like a medicine man or a shaman, and he's wearing a bird mask.
That's
Yeah.
creepy.
How did they examine this? I don't
He
get
kind of just looks like he's screaming.
It's awkward.
Yeah.
This is not a bird. This is some sort of like a staff, some sort of like a ceremonial object.
Right?
Yeah, it has a bird on top. Here's another staff, right? So people are thinking this is some sort of a religious ritual or a medicine man or a healing ritual. We don't exactly know for sure. Maybe it was a bullfighting thing. We don't know. But the best archaeologists say this is probably some sort of a religious ceremony that we just don't have any other records for. Other people think maybe it was like a fertility thing. I'll let you figure out why they think that. We don't know. We don't know exactly what it is. All we know is that there was some sort of... Bottom line is, with all of these cave paintings, whatever it was that they wanted to depict was important enough for them to go through the work of doing it. Well, it doesn't seem like that much work to put some paint on a wall. It does when you have to hunt all day in order to survive. It does when you have to find shelter to survive. Basically, your entire 20 hours a day or 18 hours a day that you're awake is survival. The entire time, all day, every day, 365. So for them to take time out of survival mode to make this means it must have been important. We just don't know what the importance is. We just don't know what it is. But we know it must have been important. There's probably hundreds of thousands of other cave paintings that have been lost to time or destroyed by people. We don't know. The Lascaux cave, you can't go in it anymore. It was open to the public. It was discovered in the 1950s. It was actually two young boys in France that were playing around. They found this. It was after a lot of heavy rains. And there was a mudslide on the side of a hill, and it opened up this cave. So they went in with some torches, and they found this. And it's massive. There's these massive caves with all these paintings. And so they went in and told the authorities. And it was open to the public for many years until about the 80s. But all of the humidity of people's breath and the carbon dioxide was starting to deteriorate the painting. So they went in with very high-powered, high-resolution cameras, and they've gone back in multiple times since with high-resolution cameras, and they've completely recreated the cave in a visitor center. So you can't go into the actual cave today, but they've recreated it so that you can kind of get a sense of what it was like. So if you're ever there, it's worth going. I've not been. I'd like to. But yeah, some of these caves you can't go into. They built one like out of concrete. Like think of like if you've gone to Arizona type thing, like one of those types of exhibits. Yeah.
Do they ever just like cut out the rock and then they don't do that?
They won't do that. They'll just take very high resolution images. They will take small samples to try to date things or to try and figure out what pigment it is. Usually from like, if some pigment has dripped or something, they'll take it from that section. Yep, so they'll be very careful about that because they want to preserve it for people 1,000 years from now. Okay? Oh, this is the entrance of the Lascaux cave. So this was, obviously this is cut out, but there was this kind of mudslide and it just opened up and these boys went in. Yeah. You can tell it's a very damp, wet area, but underneath it's all preserved, right? Prehistoric objects. Let's move to prehistoric objects. We're still in the Paleolithic period. We don't see a lot of objects earlier than 15,000 BC. There's a couple, but not really. The two main reasons why we don't see many objects earlier than 15,000 BC, one is deterioration Deterioration. And 2 is portability.
What is that?
So deterioration means it gets destroyed,
Right.
right?
Right.
Portability, it gets lost,
Oh.
right? Because they're objects, they can move around. They get destroyed or they get tossed into a fire pit or whatever. So those are the 2 reasons why we don't see many objects. But this is one, and this is an outstanding example
Oh my gosh.
of a tiny little statuette. This is not big. This is about 6 to 8 inches tall.
Oh wow.
And this is made out of wood. Again, found in a cave. Thank you, caves. They're humidity constant, temperature constant, so things, like mold and mildew are not going to destroy things. But this is carved out of wood. This little white thing, this is just there to hold the object in a museum, so that was not originally part of it. This is what we call an anthropomorphic figure, meaning it's half man, half animal. And we see this a lot. Again, in these very early pagan religions, they worshipped animals or they had some sort of a connection to animals. And so they would make a half human, half lion man figure, half human, half lion figure. And that's what Lowenmensch means. Lowenmensch just means lion man in Germany, or in German. It was found in Germany. Again, dates to 33,000, 38,000 BC. This is the oldest object that we know of. Again, very, very well preserved. There were other figures that were found, just tiny little fragments of other figures that were found in nearby caves. Again, this leads to the possibility that Lowenmensch figurines or other ones that are similar were important in the mythology of humans in the early Upper Paleolithic. So Upper Paleolithic means Northern European Paleolithic. Very rudimentary, but considering it was done almost 40,000 years ago, it's still pretty good. This one, again, was just discovered about 15 years ago. So it was just recently discovered. Before this point, the oldest figurine that was known, and go ahead and get your snickering out of the way, the oldest figurine that we found is called the Venus of Willendorf, also nearby. This is in Austria, Willendorf, Austria. It's called the Venus of Willendorf because, well, we have to give a name to it. We don't know what it's called, so we just call it the Venus, the woman of Willendorf, the place it was found. So this is just one figure, not 4, but this is just kind of showing you what it is. Again, this is just showing, this is a stand that she's sitting on in the museum. This is made out of stone, and again, it's small. This is about 3 to 4 inches tall. And it was made small, why? If it's a religious object, yeah,
So they can bring it around.
you can carry it around. You can keep it with you, maybe.
Yeah.
And there are, again, other fragments found nearby that indicate that there were probably more of these types of figures, that this was sort of kind of like how we carry around a rosary or a religious medal. It was that sort of an object. What does it signify? It's not just a woman. How did a lot of people die in these early periods? Childbirth. Childbirth, right? So archaeologists think that this is, and historians probably think that this is probably some sort of a talisman or like a religious object to pray for or to offer to the gods for a good childbirth or for fertility itself. Why do they think that? Well, because all of the parts of the woman's body that are meant for childbirth are greatly exaggerated, right? There's a great emphasis placed on those sections of her body, whereas her face, there's nothing there. Right? So it was not a depiction of a woman. It was not a depiction of a god or a goddess. It was a depiction of the concept of childbirth, fertility, something like that. And again, this is hair done in very complex braids. We do know that they braided their hair in this sort of a way.
Way around their faces.
And again, maybe the face got knocked off. Maybe it wore off, we don't know. Or maybe it just wasn't carved there at all. Okay? But up until the Lowenmensch was discovered, this was the oldest figure that we knew about.
So it wasn't made in Willendorf?
It was found in Willendorf.
Okay.
So it was probably made nearby. It could have been transported, but probably not more than 100 miles or so.
Like these people that were like in these European countries like Austria and Germany, were they like what ethnicity? Were they white or were they?
Probably. Probably. Yeah. They probably looked more like what we would consider like Middle Eastern type.
They're outside all the time.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to look at the Fertile Crescent more later on, but we have what's called now the Neolithic area. So we've moved from Paleolithic to the Neolithic. We've gone through about 20,000 years in the first half of this class. Now we're going into the Neolithic area, or era. We're going to be talking about this area quite a bit here in the next class, and then we're going to go down into Egypt, starting more next week and then in the weeks after. But the Neolithic era, you know, everything else that we've been looking at before, this is, people are nomadic. There's not settlements. Again, you don't have time to create a settlement, right? If you're trying to just survive, you're not going to spend time building a house or a settlement or a, you know, or any of that sort of stuff. You're trying to figure out, where am I going to sleep tonight? What am I going to eat? That's it. You don't care. But around the Neolithic era, we have this development in what's called the Fertile Crescent. And the Fertile Crescent is basically these areas that are very lush. This is modern day Iraq now. So Baghdad is right around here, right? Baghdad is right around here. We have Saudi Arabia down here, Kuwait, Syria, Israel.
Dude, I thought that was like all desert.
It is now, but back then it was much more fertile.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then we also have the area around the Nile that was much more fertile than it is today. So this is called the Fertile Crescent. Settlements begin here around 7000 BC. There was this very large settlement in, I'm going to go back to the map real quick, in this town called Catalhayuk, which is in modern day Turkey. So this is the settlement today. Obviously it doesn't look like this today, but archaeologists came and figured out this is probably what it looked like. And this is one of the earliest settlements that we know of, and this is one of the earliest cities or towns that we have ever discovered. There were some dwellings that predate this, some just small rudimentary house-type structures, but they were just one-off things. But here in this area, there was this settlement. And this begins instead of the hunter-gatherer period, now we have people who are starting to figure out how to do agriculture. Right? This begins about 7000 BC. So for a very long period of time, from the 40,000, up to 7,000, people were just kind of nomadic, figuring things out on a day-to-day basis. But they're starting to be able to farm and to raise livestock and to raise animals. And this begins kind of the era of civilization. So that's what we call the Neolithic period, the Neolithic, the New Stone period. This is the beginning of what we call civilization, because people are starting to gather together, work together, figure things out on their own instead of just trying to survive. This is what an early house in this area looked like. And again, fairly well developed in a fairly short period of time. But again, because people are starting to work together instead of just being in these family tribes, because people are working together, there's the division of labor. Some people are going to be farming, some people are going to be raising livestock, some people are going to be building homes. So now you can start to devote more time to these specific things. And that's a total game changer for civilization, for the human species, essentially. You can start to do this sort of stuff, and it's much more secure. Not just from attack, but from being able to eat every day. Another aspect of early Neolithic art or archaeology is what we call megaliths. Megaliths comes from two Greek words put together, mega, big, lith, stone, big stones. Right? So the Greeks were the early archaeologists in the 1700s. Not very imaginative, but they figured it out. So this is Stonehenge. Stonehenge is one of the most famous prehistoric megaliths around. There are other ones. We'll look at a few other ones here in a little bit. And there are a lot of theories about Stonehenge. What was it for? Tony thinks it's aliens. It's not aliens, Tony.
Is it like a temple?
It's like a portal.
It's a portal. It's where the rapture is going to happen.
Like a building?
No, it looked pretty much like this. So it consists of a ring of standing stones, each one about 13 feet tall.
Guys, how did they get that up there?
It's insane.
Look at those things.
I don't see the purpose of it.
Right.
Doesn't make sense.
So we'll talk about that.
Maybe a temple? No.
This is constructed in what's called post and lintel
Outdoor temple.
construction. Post and lintel basically means you have 2 posts, and then you have what's called a lintel. So that's called post and lintel construction. Very basic way of constructing things. You have 2 things, 1 thing across the top. Yep.
Not finished, or like
It was. It just, earthquakes or other things happened. Ice got in and cracked some of the stones and they fell apart. Again, long period of time. So we're talking about 5,000 years from today. And it existed there and nothing was ever removed. But let's get into how it was built and when it was built. The first period, called Stonehenge 1, dates from around 3100 BC. And it was very basic. It was these, these dashed lines are basically raised earth, not very tall, about 2-3 feet tall. And then it was just a ring of stones, just standing up stones. Okay?
Big ones, like the 13 feet ones?
About 4 feet tall. Not that big.
Wait, how would they get them to the ground? Were they just standing?
I'll show you in a minute. So in 2013, a team of archaeologists excavated more than 50,000 cremated bone fragments from 63 individuals.
So it's a
So it was a burial site. It was definitely a burial site. And we'll talk a little bit, let's hold that for a minute. Let's talk about why here after we go through the process of how it was built. These stones that were put in originally are what's called blue stones from Wales. So this is done in England. These stones were quarried in Wales and then transported 100 miles to this location, quarried, cut from the cliff. So they were cut from the cliff and transported 100 miles. Doesn't seem like a long time today. Logs. Roll it over on logs. 100 miles.
that's insane.
Mm-hmm. The next stage took place about 1,000 years later. So this is where these original blue stones were. This is this berm of earth. These were these original blue stones. And this shows you that there's just a few of them left. They've been removed for some reason, or maybe buried or something.
all the holes where stones once were.
Mm-hmm. And then the second stage was done, which is kind of what we see today. Stonehenge 2.
So it was a lot bigger than it is now.
Yeah, but these were just these smaller ones. This is what we see today. There's just a few of these left.
So I understand, like,
Yeah, I'm
those,
confused.
an earthquake can, like, take away a stone.
Can crack it, and it can just kind of fall, and then it just slowly gets swallowed up by the earth.
Gets away.
Why would they build
It's down in the earth somewhere by 5 feet or so. Floods, earthquakes, silt.
Why build it in that location?
We don't know. We don't know. It's not a very satisfying answer, but we don't know.
Okay, but like, well, how do they get the big ones up, like the 13 feet ones?
A crane.
Tell you in a second. Evidence of this second phase is not really visible. So I'm sorry, I was wrong. This is the third phase right here. I'm sorry. This is the third phase. The second phase were these stones that were put in here. We don't have any evidence of them. Maybe those were transported away. We don't know. We just don't know. And then, but again, look at the dates. We're talking about 500 to 800 year periods between each of these. So it's a long period of time. So a new ruler comes around or new medicine man comes around and says, hey, do this. I don't know. And then Stonehenge 3. This is this next phase from about 2600 to 2400 BC. 30 enormous, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, types of stone were brought to the site. They came from a quarry about 16 miles north of Stonehenge. So these blue stones, these smaller ones, these 4 feet stones, were brought about 100 miles. These larger ones were brought from a quarry about 16 miles. Still an enormous distance for these massive stones. These stones are about 2 tons each. They're big. They're big, right? Yeah. You're not just moving bags of concrete, right? You're moving like a car, 16 miles with logs.
Wait, how far is like 100 miles?
100 miles from here to,
California?
no, from Sedona?
Yeah. So then
That's crazy.
But it was mostly flat. It's flat, so you're fine. No big deal.
So they restored it?
Yeah, so they have restored it as best as they can, because you can just kind of see this is kind of how it falls apart. I mean, there's floods, how do these stones just disappear? like Maria asked, well, they fall over. There's winds, there's earthquake. Ice will get in here, and then ice expands and cracks the stone, and it happens. Okay, so
Do people actually visit this site?
oh yeah,
I
yeah.
don't understand that.
Yeah. It's very much a new age thing now. Like we're gonna go to this place. All right, so let's get into the purpose of it. Why did they do this? Well, they think it was used as an astronomical observatory or a religious site. On the summer solstice, June 21st of every year, the sun comes right between these two stones that are right here, and it passes right between those, and it goes right to what's called the keystone, or the end stone in the middle, perfectly lined up with the sun at that date. Again, June 21st is a big holiday, right? It's midsummer, so it was a very important date for pagan religions, right? Still is today in a lot of pagan religions. We're going to see that when we look at the Celts and the Druids and those types of people. Especially in Northern Europe, summer solstice, this is when the day is the longest, right? So there's probably some religious significance to it as well. Maybe it was an astronomical observatory, we don't know. More recently, there's a couple new theories that have been proposed. Some have suggested that Stonehenge was a place of healing, the primeval equivalent of Lourdes. Why? Why do people think this? Well, because remember I said that there were all these burned remains there. Scientists, especially recently, have dug and done like X-ray and CAT scan of the ground, and they've been able to carefully dig up some of these remains. All of the remains that they found, I think I'm correct on this, all of them, or at least most of them, have some sort of injury to them. So broken bones or a smashed skull or something like that. People think that if you got injured or hurt, you were brought to this place and you either survived or you didn't, and if you didn't, you were buried there and you were cremated there.
Or it could be like a sacrifice thing where they just smash it.
We don't think that, just because there's no other evidence in Northern European cultures of human sacrifice at this point. There just isn't. It could be, but the other evidence doesn't seem to support that. It seems to be more of a place of healing. Again, we don't know. So maybe it could be both. It could be, this myth, this spiritual place of, this is where the sun is. We're going to, make this in a very, precise way. And because we've done this so well, it's like bringing people to a church, right? It's a sacred place. We bring them here for healing.
Well, if there was the aspect of the sacrifice, it could be that they thought if you weren't healed there, then that was bad luck. Like,
Possibly, yeah.
but they used the solstice, summer solstice thing as a way to heal. Like,
So could you only heal on
We
the
don't know.
day of the
So
year?
the
We don't
summer
know.
solstice is like a religious thing?
Yeah. It's a religious thing for pagans because it's the longest day of the year. It's the triumph of the sun over the darkness, right? You can get really fancy about it if you want to. However, they do concede that the site was probably multifunctional, so it was used for more than one thing, and used for ancestor worship as well. Again, there's a burial ground there, so you worship your ancestors. The most popular other theory, according to a team of British researchers, that it was built as a symbol of peace and unity. So there were all these different tribes there,
Oh my gosh, it's beautiful.
and we don't know. All right, so how do they build this? How do they get these massive stones
I just don't get it.
standing upright? Because these are mostly almost perfectly vertical.
I know, exactly.
Okay, so here's how you do it.
They stack a guy on top of another guy. Get screwed in. And hold
Screw it.
I'm going to show you how they put the stones upright, and then we'll researchers still don't know exactly how they put the lintels on top. But we know how they did the stones. So you have this massive stone here, right? So what they would do is they would build a platform right here in the middle, and they would place the stone on top of it, okay? And so what I'm going to do is instead of redrawing the stone each time, I'm just going to redraw this section, right? So the stone's going up, but I'm just going to draw it going down. So what they do is they put weights on one section. What does that do? Raises it up. When that raises it up, you can put a shoring support right here. Take these off, move the weights back here.
Stop it.
This section goes up,
What the heck?
and then you put more shoring supports up here, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth.
I don't get it.
Okay, so what you're doing is you're teeter-tottering it, and each time you're teeter-tottering it up, you put more stuff here. And then you put weight on it. Now it's a little bit higher. Then you put more stuff up here. Then it.
Why did they look like to the ground?
While people are doing that, you dig a big hole. Okay? And then eventually, and you make a little berm, like a little mountain of dirt. Okay? And then eventually what happens is you've got your stone like this with all these supports all up here. Now what do? You take water or shovels or sticks or whatever, and you wipe this away. And the weight of it goes down deep enough that it just makes it stand straight up.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Well, then how come they didn't do the same thing, like so on top? Like,
That must have taken general.
Yeah, that would take
I
forever.
don't get it.
So you're just teeter-tottering it, up, up, up,
And then it sinks all the way down to the ground.
and then you're digging a hole, and then you basically just let it slide,
And it goes right back.
right? Yeah.
So what if the hole's too big?
Then you got a really low, then you got a low post, and someone's probably executed.
Wait,
Okay.
how did they get the one on top though? Do they do the same thing?
There's lots of theories. People have been able to recreate it using ancient tools.
Climb up there.
I don't know.
Carry
We don't
it.
know.
Put it on your back.
Maybe there was just these massive platforms and same sort of thing, and you're just building it, and then you just slide it across.
How'd they figure that out then?
It was actually a guy in Michigan. He did it all by himself. One guy was able to do this. He was just walking across the top with buckets of cement, and then it would do, 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 and he was able to do it just by himself. He did it. It's on YouTube. You can YouTube it. Huh?
How do they like move it back and forth?
They would put weights on this end, and that would.
I don't like. Is it just like a one-man thing, or is it like?
So there are probably multiple people doing it, but this guy was doing it just to show, hey, I can just do this by myself. I can move a 2-ton rock all by myself. It's possible. Just physics. Yep. So nowadays it's very much a cultural pagan type thing. Cool. There are other megaliths around, none quite as cool as Stonehenge. This is in France. This one is in Ireland.
It's a Lion King.
And then this one is in Scotland.
I want to go to Scotland so bad.
What do you consider the things on Easter Island at the big
That and
ones?
Ireland.
Those are also megaliths. Same sort of thing. Yep. And they did the same exact sort of thing. They would dig a pit and then just roll it and roll it in.
Crazy.
Is it just the head or are there actually like the bodies of stuff?
No, it's just the head. It's just the head. Okay? So that's prehistory. Next class, Ancient Near East. We're going to have 2 classes on Ancient Near East. So that'll take up next week. All right.
2 classes to cover.
Yeah. All right, so start thinking, again, we're going to be looking at the first 6 posters during this first semester. There are art history books in the bookshelf. There's also some in my office. I'll bring some in. Just start looking through the pages, basically up until about, sorry, I don't mean to keep you late. Yeah, up to Byzantine. So the first 8 posters. So basically anywhere up till about 500 to 1000 AD. You can start looking through, and you can look at a work of art or compare contrast. We'll talk more about research paper later, but just start thinking about it. What is it that you'd like to do? Is it the pyramids? Is it the pharaohs? Is it Stonehenge? Is it, stuff like that, okay? All right, see you tomorrow.